Hey guys, it's the Junior Coder, and this is part 4 of the Intro to Python tutorial series. So let's get right into it. In this section, I'm going to talk to you guys about for loops in Python. In the last tutorial, you learned about while loops. You learned that we use while loops to execute a block of code multiple times. We have another kind of loop in Python that is a for loop, and we use that to iterate over items of a collection, such as a string, because a string is a sequence of characters, so it looks like a collection. So we can use a for loop to iterate over each item in a collection and do something with it. Here's an example. We type out for, then we define a variable. This is what we call a loop variable. In each iteration, this variable will hold one item. Let's call it item, and here we type a string, like Python, followed by a colon. So with this for loop, we can iterate over this string, and in each iteration, this item variable will hold one character at a time. So in the first iteration, it will hold P, and then the second is Y, third is T, and so on. So here we are inside of our for block because of the indentation here. So whatever we type here will be executed in each iteration. For now, we can simply print this item. So when you run this program, you can see that each character in our string is printed on a different line. Let's look at another example. In Python, we can define lists using square brackets. So here we can define a list of names. For example, let's do John and Smith. So now let's run our program, and you can see that in each iteration we get a new name and print it on a new line. We can also loop over a list of numbers, for example 1, 2, 3, and 4. So when we run this, we get a different number on each line. But what if we want to iterate over a large list of numbers? We don't want to type out a list of, let's say, 100 or 1,000 items. We don't want to type 5, 6, 7, all the way to 100. That's when we use the range function. So let me delete this. In Python, we have a built-in function called range. We use it to create a range of numbers. So we give it a number, let's say 10, and when we run the program, we see numbers from 0 all the way to 9. So it doesn't include 10. We can also work with a range of numbers here. So let's say we want to start from 5 and go all the way to 10. When we run this program, we see 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Also, this range function can optionally take a step. So after the 10, let's give it a step. So let's write 2. And now when we run our program, we get 5, 7, and 9. So it's skipping a number after each iteration. So this is the basics of using for loops in Python. Here's an exercise for you. I want you to write a program to calculate the total cost of all the items in a shopping cart. For example, let's say we have a list of 10, 20, and 30. Write a program to calculate the total of that. My solution is coming up next. So we start by making a list called prices, and let's set it to 10, 20, and 30. So as you learned, we use for loops to iterate over all the items in a collection. A collection can be a list, it can be a string, it can be a range object that is returned from the range function, it can be any kind of object that has multiple items. So in this example, we're going to use a for loop to iterate over the list of prices. So let's type out for item in the list of prices. By the way, this loop variable, you don't have to call it item, you can call it anything you want. So in this case, price will make more sense. So let's go back to the for block. Now in each iteration, this price will hold a value. So the first iteration will hold 10, the second will be 20, and the third will be 30. So we need to define another variable to calculate the total. We'll do that outside the for block. We'll do total equals 0 for now. Now in each iteration, we get the current price and add it to the total. So to do that, we can write total equals total plus price, or to simplify this, we can just do total plus equals price, which is the same expression in less code. So after our for loop, this total variable has a total of all the prices, so we can simply print that on terminal. Or we can use a formatted string to prefix it with an F, and then we'll add a label called total, then curly braces, and add the total variable. So now let's run our program. So the total of all of prices is 60. Now, in this section, we're going to take a closer look at lists. So I'm going to define a list of names, and I'll set it to John, Bob, Sarah, and Mary. Now let's print the list on terminal. What we see on the terminal looks exactly like how we defined our list. So we have square brackets, and inside these square brackets we have our items. So John, Bob, Sarah, and Mary. Now we can access an individual element using an index. So here we type out square brackets and specify the index. So the index of the first object is 0. So when we run it, we get John. Now if you want to print out the third element in this list, its index is 2. So let's run that. We'll get Sarah. Now we can also pass a negative index here, so -1 refers to the last element in the list, which is Mary. If you pass -2, this will return the second item from the end of the list, which is Sarah. We can also use a colon to select a range of items. So if we type 2 and then a colon, this will return the items starting from the second index, which is Sarah, all the way to the end of the list. So if we run this program, we'll get 2 elements, Sarah and Mary. We can also specify an end index, so let's say 3, so this will return all the items from the second to the third index without including the third. So this will only return one object, which is Sarah. Now this also has default values, so if you leave out the end index, it will return every element starting from the second index. Now also, if you leave out the start index, this expression will return every object from the beginning to the end of the list. And by the way, these square brackets do not modify our original list. So here, let's set the start index back to 2, and then let's run our program. So we get Sarah and Mary. Then let's print the list again. So as you can see, it is not affected. We can also modify any of the elements in this list. Let's say we made a mistake and the first element shouldn't be spelled like that. So we access it by using an index that is names of 0. Then we set it to something new. So let's do JON. Now when we print our original list, we can see that it's updated. So these are the basics of lists. Here's an exercise for you. I want you to write a program to find the largest number in a list. My solution is coming up next. Let's start by making a list of numbers. Then let's set it to some random numbers, so 3, 6, 8, 10, and 2. Now, to find the largest number in this list, we need to define another variable, and let's call it max. This variable will hold the largest number in the numbers list. Now, initially, you want to assume that the first item in this list is the largest number, so we set max to the number of 0. Chances are our assumption is wrong. So we need to iterate over this list and get the largest number and compare it to max. If the largest number is greater than max, then we change max to that number. If it's not greater than max, we move on to the next number. So in this case, in the first iteration, it will check if the first number is greater than max. So is 3 greater than max? No. So it moves on to 6. Is 6 greater than max? Yes. So it changes max to 6. And it will do the same process with the other elements in this list. So here we need a for loop. So for number in numbers. Now we need to check if this number is greater than max. So if number is greater than max, then max equals the number. So now let's print max on the terminal and run our program. So we get 10. In this section, I'm going to talk to you guys about the list methods or list functions. These are the operations that we can perform on a list. So let's define a list of numbers. Let's set it to some random numbers. So 5, 2, 1, and 7 and 4. Now, there are a number of things we can do with a list. We can add new items to it, we can remove existing items, we can check for the existence of an item. So when we type numbers dot, here you can see all of the functions or methods they can perform on this list. So let's write append, which basically adds a new item to the list, and let's pass 20. Then let's print the list on the terminal and run our program. As you can see, 20 is added at the end of this list. But what if you want to add a number somewhere in the middle or at the beginning? That's when you use the insert method. So instead of append, let's write numbers.insert. This method takes two values. So when you write open parenthesis, look at this tooltip above the method. It says that the first value that we need to pass here is an index. So let's say you want to add an item at the beginning of our list. So we set our index position to 0. Then the second value is the actual object that we want to add to this list. Let's say we want to add the number 10. When we run our program, you can see that the number 10 is placed at the beginning of the list and all the other numbers are pushed to the right. We can also remove an item, so we call remove and pass the item that we want to remove. So let's do 5. And when we run our program, you can see that 5 is removed from the list. If you want to remove all the items in the list, you can call the clear method. This method doesn't take any values. So when we print the list, you can see that it's empty. We also have another useful method called pop, and with this method we can remove the last item in a list. So when we call that, we can see that 4 is gone. Now if you want to check for the existence of an item in our list, you can call the index method. Then we pass a value here like 5, and this returns the index of the first occurrence of this item. So when we print this on the terminal, we can see that the first occurrence is at index 0, which is the first number. Now if you pass something that isn't in our list, like 50, you'll get an error, value error. It says 50 is not in the list. There's also another way to check for the existence of an item. We can use the in operator, so let me show you how. So we type 50 in numbers, then it gives us a boolean value, so it says false. That means that 50 is not on our list. So here's an exercise for you. Write a program to remove the duplicates in a list. My solution is coming up next. Alright, let's say we have a list of numbers with a bunch of duplicates. So let's do 2, 3, 2, 4, 5, 3, 4, 6, and 1. So to remove the duplicates, we need to define another list. Let's call that uniques. And let's set it to an empty list. Then we need to iterate over our first list and get each item. And if we don't have that number in the uniques list, we'll add it to the list. So for number in numbers, now we need to check to see if that number is in the unique list. So if number not in uniques, uniques dot append number. And then outside our for loop, let's simply print uniques. So now when we run our program, we get 2, 3, 4, 6, and 1. So the duplicates are removed. In this section, I'm going to talk to you guys about another important structure in Python called tuple. Tuples are similar to lists, so we can use them to store a list of items. But unlike lists, we cannot modify them. We cannot add new items, we cannot remove any items. We say tuples are immutable. We cannot mutate or change them. Let me show you. So I'm going to start by defining a list of numbers. Let's set it to 1, 2, and 3. So we use square brackets to define lists and parentheses to define tuples. So let's change these to parentheses. Now we have a tuple. So if we write numbers dot, you can see that we don't have the append or insert method, so we cannot add new items to this tuple. We also don't have remove, clear, or pop, so we cannot remove any of these items. We only have two methods, count and index. We use count to count the number of occurrences of an item, and index to find the index of the first occurrence of an item. So we can only get information about a tuple, we cannot change it. So, similar to lists, we can access individual elements by using square brackets. So if you want to access the first element in a list, you do the index of 0. So let's print that on the terminal and run our program. So we get 1. But if you try to change the first item, you'll get an error. So let's try that. Let's try to change it to 10. So if we run our program, we get a type error. It says tuple object does not support item assignment. So that'll be it for part 4. If you enjoyed, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Keep a lookout for part 5 of this series. And I'll catch you next time. Bye.